Okay, good afternoon. Whoa, that's a good volume. Welcome to the second in our Open Innovation speaker series. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to let you all know that we have some refreshments and cookies in the back, and we really do not want to take them back with us. So you would be doing us a great service if you would help yourself, either now or at the end of the talk. And thank you for coming on a beautiful September day. So it's my pleasure to introduce our second speaker in the series, Carol Mimura, who, as you can see from the presentation, is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances, IPIRA, I think this is called? Yeah. IPIRA, okay. Carol has a wonderful background for us in this series because not only is she really at the forefront of issues between the university on the one hand and industry on the other hand, and how they can build productive, collaborative relationships together. She herself is trained as a scientist with a Bachelor's of Science from Yale in molecular biology and biochemistry, and a Ph.D. in biochemistry and microbiology from Boston University. So as we were chatting just before her talk, she was saying that in the work that she does, it's actually easier to teach some of the law to a scientist as they adjudicate these issues of how to work together than it is to try to teach a lawyer enough science to really be effective in the job. So that'll give you a sense of where she's coming from. Even though she's not trained as a lawyer, I think you'll find she really knows what she's doing. It's my great pleasure to welcome Carol Mimura. Carol, thank you for coming.
Thank you, too. Can you hear me well? It is okay. And there's one person in the audience who knows that probably the correct pronunciation of my name is Mimura, even though I don't say it that way because I'm fourth generation by now, American. Thanks so much for your interest and thanks for coming out on this hot day. I know you have other options, so I really appreciate your interest. I'm here to talk about, in general, our strategy and our philosophy and some of our methodologies under which we want to maximize the impact of our research, including collaboration with industry, and we want to facilitate translation of our basic science results into real goods and services for public benefit. So, and it's always important to say that everything we do in the Office of Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances, IPIRA, is consistent with the university's mission, which is teaching, research, the dissemination of information, and public service. Also, it has been documented as of a 2002 data, a study published in 2004, that in fact the 10 campuses in the UC system are a tremendous research powerhouse. It was estimated in that study that they constitute 7% of all R&D activity in the state of California, and that 1.3% of the gross state product in California, the total amount of goods and services in the state, are attributable to productivity gains in the UC system. So given that UC is a tremendous research powerhouse, we think that it's even all the more important that since we are a university, we have a moral duty to make sure that when we have results from basic research that could have practical application, that we must deploy those to benefit society. It doesn't do anyone any good for them to just languish on the shelf or in the lab. So in our philosophy, we view the university as an innovation accelerator. The university is primarily innovating with state and federal funds, some industry funds. About this year it will be for the first time close to 10% of the total. And we work with industry in the private sector to translate basic science into other products and services, and in so doing we stimulate economic development. And in turn, industry-university partnerships sit at the intersection of science and engineering, business and law. And industry-university partnerships bring back resources to the campus. If you superimpose these triads, you can easily see that at least two of the largest economic drivers in the state of California, the information technologies industry and the biotech industry, have arisen from public-private partnerships and interactions between the university and the private sector in many ways, in many overlapping networks. It also explains you can go on with these interrelationships and these triads. This one on funding alone. The university depends on funding from industry, the university, and the government. We work together. We work synergistically to leverage what we have individually to translate basic research. So the IPIRA logo is trying to capture the notion that is consistent with open innovation principles, that we can't do it alone. We must work with other parties. We really, insularity is equal to death. I mean, we must interact, we must take in government and state funds, industry funds, mix it all together, and at the end of the day, accelerate innovation out of the universities. Including through the formation of public-private partnerships and product development partnerships to bridge the huge translational research gaps that we all face. After all, when we have a result based on research at the university from federal or state funding, it's always very early stage research that really is unlikely to have a true commercial application. It certainly wouldn't be product ready. So translational research gaps are huge, and these constructs help us to bridge those gaps. So the office consists of the pre-existing Office of Technology Licensing that is responsible for licensing IP rights to the private sector for commercial development, and its peer division, the Industry Alliances Office, brings in research and materials and personnel and funding from the private sector to Berkeley. These two offices are under common management. They both report to me. And of course, in this, as I said before, relationships in our approach in dealing with industry, we value the corporate relationship higher than any single transaction that we do in either of our offices. It's simply a higher and greater goal. So with this structure, the Office of Technology Licensing is perfecting patent and copyrights, licensing those rights to companies, also sending materials and personnel to companies, in the outward direction to industry under an activity we call Technology Push. The sibling office, the peer division, is responsible for transactions in the opposite direction, bringing materials, people, and resources to Berkeley. But because they are under common management, these two activities are not in conflict with one another, and they're not competitive with one another. And it's actually, of course, it's not surprising that when companies fund research at Berkeley, they fund a project based on a specific scope of work and its corresponding budget, that they would then like to license the resultant IP. Under the technology pull model, we are inventing what industry is supporting us to do research on. It's also not surprising that if we have a patent based on Berkeley research arising from federal or state funding or other public funds or foundation funding, and we shop those rights, market them to the private sector, a common response from industry is often, it's so early stage, we're not interested. So in this construct then, it's just natural that they might want to fund the further development of that very basic embryonic technology to bring it closer to commercial relevance to them. So the construct makes sense, and then the two sides of the organization work together in a cycle. So in our approach, our definition of technology transfer at Berkeley is not even consistent with the most common definition of university technology transfer elsewhere, because we view tech transfer as a holistic, expansive approach. Tech transfer doesn't consist of the transactions consummated in our office. It consists of an ongoing relationship over many years, spanning many points of contact between industry and the university. So it's akin to building a pyramid or going up a staircase of a relationship, or pushing together sectors of a pie to create a whole. So under this approach, under the relationship model then, collaborations and partnerships are the key to our success. And unless we collaborate with industry and share results and have materials and funding and other resources going in both directions, we really can't achieve our goals. So again, networks and sharing are our strength. And so this philosophy is consistent with what the outgoing president at UC, Bob Dines, stated some years ago that UC should be all about. He said that it wasn't good enough with all of those resources, the $3 billion per year, to do R&D at Berkeley. You really have to do that plus deliver. So we are consistent with that. We embrace impact. We want to maximize the impact of our research at Berkeley. And under this rubric, then, no single model of transacting with industry is dominant. We have to consider a full spectrum of models in order to be efficacious in pursuit of the goal of impact. And the former dean of engineering here at Berkeley really he advised us when we established the office, and he clarified that this really should be the goal. It's very consistent with the model that he had for engineering, and we're very grateful to him for that. So since technology transfer success, then, by our definition, consists of rights transfer in both directions, not just in the outgoing direction, with maximization of impact being the goal and revenue generation being second to that, then we believe that we should be entitled to have different definitions of success under the model and different metrics by which we gauge the success of our activities. So because, after all, most technology transfer from university happens in traditional ways with no management at all, graduating students, publishing, informing, lecturing, all of this flows out without any office being the intermediary. And that's appropriate. It's most of what is developed at the university. So when we do make something proprietary, say by patenting or perfecting copyrights and licensing them, it should be the exception rather than the rule. And we must demonstrate good stewardship of those rights. Because after all, we wouldn't want to have a patent from Berkeley that then impedes the development of an entirely new science because it was managed in a certain way, and only one company has the right to commercialize that, when if it's truly seminal and it truly should form the basis of a new science, it should be broadly and freely disseminated in order to induce collaboration, and all of the things that I've said would increase or catalyze innovation. Also, it's simply consistent with the culture at Berkeley, which has a strong culture of sharing, including Ph.D. open source licensing, and a strong sense of social justice and otherwise collaborating globally. So all of this in our office values the corporate relationship. Everything we do is subordinate to the corporate relationship. Was there a question in the back? Feel free if you... Okay. And this relationship model, so we have been engaged in this philosophy and these methodologies since 2004. We're 4+ years into it, has borne fruit. Because under this model, it's not surprising that when an institution values the corporate relationship more than any single transaction, say haggling over the terms of a patent license, and they utilize their networks to advantage, that orientation breaks down long-standing cultural barriers. And it attracts funding. It lowers the barrier to gifting into Berkeley as an institution that has an enlightened outlook on bringing in resources from industry. Under this model, corporate-sponsored research has, in fact, it had tripled in the first few years. It will be going up by nearly to 5-fold when, in the current fiscal year. Gift funding has also increased. Foundation funding has dramatically increased, in part due to a program that I'll describe shortly, and due to a greater number of product development partnerships and public-private partnerships. So under this new regime, if we say that success, when we deliberately restructured the IP management strategy at Berkeley in 2004. As I said, we had some internal advisors. We also had some external advisors from other universities, and we realized that if we were to define success under the new office only by the traditional metrics, that is the number of patents, the number of patent licenses, the amount of royalty income, the number of startups and the jobs created in startups, then the licensing practices would reflect only that. And instead, non-remunerative transactions, such as bringing in visitors or bringing in materials to Berkeley, because they weren't those traditional metrics, would be relegated to lower priorities. It would also cause the office to suffer from a sort of schizophrenia, not knowing if it should be a service first or a business first to maximize revenue. And if it is supposed to be both, what is the proper balance between the two? Also, the goal of impact aligns expectations and aligns goals in a way that we really didn't have before. If instead now our definition of tech transfer success is social impact, all of the words in blue, translational efficiency, sharing, affiliation, public-private partnerships, collaboration, uptake, all of those things, innovation, acceleration, global outreach, including the speed of and the efficacy of those, then, if that's the definition, then no single model for transacting deals from Berkeley is dominant. And all industry-specific needs can be addressed, including industries that are outside of the biotech industry, because all of the other methods are impactful. They're all equally viable. And also under this paradigm, the traditional alternatives, or what was considered in the past to be an alternative to traditional tech transfer, are not alternatives at Berkeley. They're all equally viable because they can be impactful. For instance, patent pooling, dedication to the public domain, open source licensing, royalty-free licensing, dedication to a patent commons, not patenting at all, or not patenting in certain geographies, all are no longer alternatives, but are equally considered as an outcome, depending on the particular deal in hand. So under this expanded definition of success, we knew that when we established the new office that the traditional metrics for university tech transfer had emphasized biotech and pharma licenses. And that's simply because the high-profile deals through the 1980s and 1990s were in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. But it's only one approach among many. And the information technology industry and the chemical industry, also the automotive industry, had long been telling us that they don't appreciate a one-size-fits-all approach. When approaching a university to have sponsored research or another relationship, if the response from the tech transfer office was, well, you have to sign this kind of an agreement because this is our standard, they really complained that it didn't take their specific needs into consideration. For instance, in the IT industry where an outcome at Berkeley would simply be an incremental improvement over the prior art, not a great leap forward or not a new product, something that would be going into a cell phone that already has hundreds of patents or an inkjet printer. They're simply not interested in an exclusive license for which they pay a % royalty on each sale. Instead, those companies in those industries, or when the product life cycle, the R&D life cycle is very short, such as with software, they're more interested simply in freedom to operate so that they can have the right to use what it is that they sponsored the development of at Berkeley. And that can be in the form of a non-exclusive royalty-free license or an agreement not to assert our rights against the licensee, or an upfront fee or a flat fee, such things. So in our methodology and philosophy, where we embrace the words in blue as the goal, we then are embracing a double bottom line accounting method for gauging success. On the left, we have the traditional, hard, easily collectible metrics: number of patents, number of licenses, startup equity in startup companies and such. On the right, we have these softer metrics that we think are equally, if not more valuable than the traditional metrics. That's malaria, so, disease, drugs funded at Berkeley, or medical costs reduced, or the number of people that have received code under the Ph.D. license worldwide, or research tools shared, collaboration, or expertise transferred. These things on the right-hand side are difficult to collect because they're softer metrics and they're non-traditional, but we are just now realizing that we value these equally as much, if not more, than the metrics on the left. Some challenges in this new environment of applying new metrics. Some are qualitative versus quantitative. If Berkeley now has an enhanced reputation as a university that is willing to embrace a full spectrum of IP management strategies, and that is a reputational gain, we know indisputably that's valuable, but it's hard for us to quantify the value and to show it against the left-hand column. It's simply qualitative. Also, it's just a problem in the art of commensuration. How do you compare the column A to column B? How do you parlay everything in column B on the right-hand side into real funding for your office? Also, even if we do collect the new metrics, we don't have a baseline to compare it to. So we can't show that under the new regime we have an uptick. Nevertheless, we think we should try. And I'm showing here some examples of what I think captures better than before some of the new metrics. I've given the URLs. So under this approach where we want to embrace a full spectrum of IP management strategies to deploy Berkeley technologies for public good, we have on one end of the spectrum gifts that are completely, I think my battery ran out, completely IP moot because gifts have no contracts associated with them and therefore have no terms and conditions. On the opposite side, under the sponsored research agreement approach, typically a company approaches a lab, they mutually agree on a particular project to be funded, the scope of work and its budget. The company pays for that budget and they have an expectation at the end of the day of having an exclusive license to the resultant IP. So that is the polar opposite. But in the middle at Berkeley, it's very important, especially under the sharing orientation, to have this middle group of types of agreements. This group in the middle is motivated not by IP, but by relationships and simply by learning, information and relationships, simply by learning what's going on at Berkeley. The largest and oldest of this agreement type is the Berkeley Sensors and Actuators Consortium, BSAC. BSAC has between 40 and 50 industry members that pay a membership fee. They pay the fee and they receive 2 seminars per year. So they come to Berkeley to see what is going on at a cutting-edge research university with a stellar engineering school. They receive relationships because they hire the students. They hire professors as consultants. Because the funding is pooled, if IP does result from an industry affiliate program approach, we offer the rights to all of the members, and therefore the rights are likely to be non-exclusively as opposed to exclusively licensed. So the membership agreements are akin to, come and join our club. It's an invitation to come to Berkeley to see what we have, what we're good at. And it can result then, if a company comes and hears what we're doing in sensors and actuators, a given company might then contract with a lab in BSAC to do dedicated sponsored research, taking it out of the pool and thereby receiving exclusive rights at the end of the day. It's one mechanism to induce another type of relationship, but in and of itself, it is a method to induce collaboration and to share. So under this full spectrum of IP management strategies, we can also populate some spectra with agreement types. As I mentioned, the sponsored research agreements would most likely have an expectation on the part of the company to have an exclusive license to IP resulting from the project. On the opposite end, we might simply have an orientation that if we're innovating in the area of vaccines, the best thing to do in order not to thwart future development might be to form a vaccine pool and just, if we have patents, to dedicate them to the pool or to the commons. In the middle, we have open collaboration. I'll get to that in the next few slides. We specifically have applied an open collaboration agreement to the Intel lab that is just adjacent to the campus. The industry affiliate programs I mentioned are based on information and relationships. And then we could populate the spectrum with hundreds of agreement types. But the point is that we don't have a bias at Berkeley for one agreement type or another. It's industry specific, lab specific, and what the scientists want to do with the results that would inform the choice of agreement or no agreement. Companies, of course, donate into Berkeley because they believe in the excellence of Berkeley and in general want to support what we do without any rights at all. So this also feeds into the concept, I think what is relevant to what I'm talking about, to open innovation, is that there are many companies that enjoy an entire relationship life cycle with Berkeley. They might have come into contact with Berkeley through joining an industry affiliates program, or they might have come into contact with Berkeley by going to a seminar or a conference or reading a paper. However they have made their first contact, they might then engage people at Berkeley in many ways over time, as I said, under that stair building relationship, in a way that the sum total of the relationships result in mutual benefit, both to the university and to the company. Just to give you an idea of how fast growing the industry agreements are from Berkeley. 1 year, these are data from 2004 showing only those companies that we contracted with in California. And then a year later, how many more? 100 more. Now the Industry Alliance's office is doing contracting at a rate of over 400 per year. I mentioned that the IT industry likes this new approach to IP management because of the reasons I stated before, but also it has resulted in some master agreements with certain companies that support quite a bit of research at Berkeley that simply facilitates the relationship and that lowers transaction costs. The newest one, HP's Global Collaboration Research Agreement from their Office of Open Innovation, was signed by all universities that agree to accept money under this program, and they're common terms throughout the world. Also, the Intel Lablet represents one relationship type that is very unique. The Intel Lablet really was the brainchild of David Tenenhaus, who in 2000 said, you know, I'm the R&D director at Intel, and of course I have Intel's best interest at heart, but he ran DARPA programs through the decade of the 90s. He was the funder, and he was impressed by the fact that he seeded innovative, groundbreaking technologies without doing any R&D himself. Or in DARPA. DARPA simply gave the money, stood back, and then was impressed by the grantees. In a similar way, he was proposing that there could be a construct, in this case, an Intel research lab across the street from Berkeley, not on campus, but immediately across Shattuck, as it turns out, in my building, where the very speculative blue sky research could be done. Things that, if they were done in-house at Intel, would not fall into any particular program or another, or product bin or another. They would be the truly bottom-up type of research projects, free of bias from the top down, interests of VPs, each of which has a specific business focus. So the goal of the Intel Lablet is to publish early and often. The real goal in terms of contracting is to stimulate collaboration. Now, under this contract, either Berkeley or Intel could file patents on any of the projects that are going on in the Intel Lablet, but neither Berkeley nor Intel has on those projects per se in the first 7 years. So it's kind of an IP standoff. Other participants can sign this agreement and then enjoy the same benefits that Intel enjoys from Berkeley, but they haven't to date. In fact, Yahoo signed a separate one and funded a separate lab also in downtown Berkeley. So this approach is an innovation accelerator because it maximizes collaboration. It lowers the barriers to collaboration in an environment where IP is perceived to be a hindrance. So of course the students benefit tremendously from having the Intel Research Lab across the street. They have access to equipment, chips, personnel, talent, and of course Intel benefits as well, including through relationships, and they have hired many students to Intel. I also wanted to mention that the principles of open innovation and the principles underlying the organizational structure have been put into effect under our socially responsible licensing program at Berkeley, which is only one of several IP rights management strategies, where we are striving to maximize the impact of Berkeley innovation globally. Under this approach, in general, we agree to deploy patent rights or copyrights on a non-exclusive royalty-free basis in order to induce investment in areas that are traditionally lacking because there is a lack of a traditional profit driver, such as on neglected disease or tropical diseases. So under this program, we want to ensure widespread availability, give attribution to experts, share revenue. We want to make drugs affordable and broadly disseminated. We want to reserve rights for anything that is invented at Berkeley so that we can, even if we patent and license an innovation, having licensed it, we still reserve the right to practice that innovation on our own behalf and to allow others in the nonprofit sector to do the same. So this IP management, interestingly, does provide commercial incentives and benefits the poor. Some examples of agreements under this program are in the area of diagnostics, dengue fever in Nicaragua, therapeutics that I'll come back to, agriculture, stress tolerance or drought tolerance for sub-Saharan Africa, vaccines, hunger, and sanitation. Almost all of them include an advance commitment from Berkeley to grant a royalty-free license for humanitarian purposes. The agreement that I'm frequently asked to describe and is definitely the most high profile in this program. Are there any questions so far? I see. Okay, thank you. Okay. It has to do with malaria.
Carol, you covered it very briefly, but if you could say just a bit more about what most of your colleagues in tech transfer offices in other universities, how they're measured, how they're rewarded, the way that they're driving tech transfer there. You mentioned it in passing, but I think it's worth contrasting that to what you're taking us through now.
Right. Well, I am told that on a national level we are somewhat iconoclastic here at Berkeley because many of the tech transfer offices not only have different reporting lines, we appropriately report to the Vice Chancellor for research. We think it's our mission to support research at Berkeley. Many offices report to the business and finance side of the university, and for that reason they are mercenary in their activities and in pursuit of revenue generation. That's too harsh because it's not either or, and it's not that we are on this end of the spectrum and they aren't. But there are gradations, and we're definitely on the more liberal side in viewing revenue generation as being secondary to the other goals of impact and dissemination and affordability under this program. But and why aren't others following suit? I think many are taking a wait and see attitude. If anything can blow up in our faces at Berkeley. If someone, I mean, we are here in these deals setting prices, we are colluding, we are price setting. Even though we're setting the price at zero, there are some non-trivial legal issues to navigate. And while we don't think we'll actually get in legal trouble over any of them, it's unproven. But we are taking the attitude that we are in a position to lead. We think we're doing the right thing, and we will ask forgiveness later if something goes wrong. But and also, I don't think we are proselytizing. We're not saying, another university is good or bad if they aren't doing this, because they have their own constraints. Every university has to do what their Office of the General Counsel does, and within their organizational structure, meet their needs in their environment. So in this agreement, essentially, we had a technology under which we could synthetically clone artemisinic acid or artemisinic treatments for malaria. And the Gates Foundation was hovering in the background saying, I understand that Berkeley and your startup company Amyris and One World Health are talking about deals. Go away and come back when you can show me that you can reduce the price of the existing drug from $2.40 to 24 cents tenfold. So the solution turned out to be a three-way collaboration agreement signed on the same day as 2 license agreements. The three-way collaboration agreement says that the Gates Foundation will give us $42.6 million. Berkeley will retain $8 million to do the cloning of the genes. Our startup company will do the applied research, the translational research, and then provide the raw material to One World Health. One World Health has expertise in clinical and regulatory affairs, and that is the very expensive part. So the license from Berkeley to our startup company, that is a for-profit company, is divided, grants rights to make the malaria drug, plus use the patents in other ways, including other industries, such as the flavor and fragrances industry. But they cannot make a profit on the malaria drug. The other license from Berkeley to One World Health grants them the right to use the patents in 88 countries worldwide that are deemed to be either low or middle income countries or otherwise defined as below certain poverty lines, such as on the World Health Organization list or the World Bank list. So they can sell the drug, but they must sell it at cost or give it away for free in those 88 countries. This pharmaceutical company is unusual because it is a non-profit pharmaceutical company, and that's very unusual. And they have funding from the Gates Foundation. We all have a mutual aligned interest of providing broad access to an affordable drug, and that was very liberating because that was the dominating drive to construct the deals. Interestingly, that $8 million for Berkeley under this Gates Foundation is much more than we would normally receive from federal funding agencies, even if the federal funding agencies were funding research of this type. And the $12 million to our startup company, Amyris, is much more than our typical startup company has, even in the first 3 years. And their funding source is a foundation. It's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we view this as a very interesting bootstrap philanthropy approach to expediting translational research. So under this model, instead of the typical situation where we have funding from a federal agency, the university might file a patent, but we would hit a wall because we would then be shopping this patent to companies. Typically, companies wouldn't be interested because definitely they would not be interested if they're for-profits and the patent is a way to make a malaria drug because there's no profit incentive in tropical countries to manufacture and sell that. Instead of that situation, we have all of the partners collaborating in advance. We have all of the agreements tied up on the first day of the collaboration, so there are no future transaction costs. And this dramatically expedites bench-to-bedside translational research that would normally take a long time and could conceivably be stalled at any of these points. The Gates Foundation, when it was signed, stated that they would hope that the model could be used at other universities, and you can read the other quotes, including it could be a paradigm shift, it could be transformational, collaborations and coordination and synergies, as similar to the open innovation concept, are becoming increasingly essential to solve these medical needs. You can read our model contract language on our website, both in license agreements and research agreements. We also have some examples there. It's too small to read here. And the final example that I wanted to bring up in a similar vein, talking about the need to collaborate and the need to reduce translational research times, to bootstrap what you have and to leverage what you have with resources of another. UC Berkeley was the winner of a global competition last year for funding from BP, the company formerly known as British Petroleum, now called Beyond Petroleum, for $500 million over 10 years. This is the largest university industry agreement so far anywhere in the world. We are enjoying this funding with our partners, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. It came about because in 2004, when BP hired the former provost from Caltech, that person, Steve Koonin, realized that they needed to get into biofuels because there is a finite source of petroleum in the world. He said, we need to get into biofuels, but out of 100,000 employees at BP, we only have 3 biologists. So should we grow it in-house or should we partner? And the answer, of course, was to partner. But he didn't simply select this or that university or company right away. They were very clever. They put out an open call for proposals with an RFP challenge to apply for the funding without too much direction. Essentially, they said, look, we need to solve global warming. Help us. Come work with us. Help us to invent the future. We need to start now, and we need to resource research right now in order to have viable solutions in 10 years. So 46 universities applied. They narrowed it down to 5, and the Berkeley, LBNL, and UIUC application was selected. One of the reasons why we were selected is that we had a pre-existing relationship with BP. We had a 10-year, $10 million research agreement with BP that we were then in the 6th year of. It had been going very well. So again, relationships and sharing can pay off. In terms of the proposal, it was a tremendous collaborative effort, including political ties. It was a tremendous effort to put together the scientific portion of the proposal. And Our presentation in London included presentations from Berkeley's Chancellor, Bergeneau, and Steve Chu, the Nobel laureate director of Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and both of them said that they had some formative experiences during their tenure at Bell Labs, these large corporate labs that have spawned many Nobel laureates and transformational technologies. And they proposed that since the large corporate labs, such as Bell Labs and Xerox PARC, were going away, that there could be a chance for academia to step into the void. And BP obviously resonated with that. They announced that we won last January, and it took 9 months to consummate the deal. I'm now at 50 minutes, and the rest of this has to do with EBI. But I think the point that I wanted to make because of this seminar, Henry, was simply that the EBI and this money consists of both an open and proprietary component. For the first time, Berkeley is renting space to BP to house BP scientists under a lease at fair market value because we want to shorten the gap. We want to narrow the translational research gap. And we know that traditionally it has been valuable to have feedback from industry, to fail early, to get feedback, not to let companies tell us what to do, but to have appropriate feedback about what the real problems are to be solved in industry and how and where academics can help. This is a hypothesis. We think that this can be transformative. So we have now funded the first 47 projects under the award in the first year, 1/3 of which are in socioeconomic and ag economic disciplines, because in studying biofuels for transportation, we need to know the effects of growing biofuels from food sources or other lignocellulosic sources. We know that using corn can affect the price of tortillas worldwide. I mean, there are tremendous societal and economic, socioeconomic issues, and a full 1/3 of the first year of the projects have been devoted to those areas. I think I should stop because of the time, but
feels like drinking from a fire hose.
Too much.
Set of things. Let me just stir the conversation up. Carol, is this just Berkeley selling itself out to industry because it needs the money?
Right.
How do we protect traditional notions of academic freedom, excellence in research, the freedom of professors to follow wherever their research leads rather than where the money is?
Right.
Aren't we being co-opted in all this?
Thank you for that question. It comes up frequently, but under corporate-sponsored research, even when industry pays all of a given budget and the overhead, the projects are both proposed by academics and carried out by academics. We would never take in money from companies with strings such that they could tell us what research project they want us to do. Now, having said that, under the typical sponsored research agreement, the company and the lab mutually agree on the project to be funded with corporate funding. And then typically students perform that research. So they have some say. Actually, BP has less say than that under this deal because the grants are given out by the executive committee, consisting of 8 people, 6 academics, and 2 people from BP that are running this, because it's a large amount of money, just like a grant-making agency, calling for proposals and then vetting the proposals based on scientific merit. Also, under corporate-sponsored research, because companies, especially BP and any other company that has the corporate-sponsored research, has chosen the corporate-sponsored research model to interact with us, have an expectation of IP licenses, and they have an expectation of exclusive licensing. When we do have a publication, we allow them to have a publication preview of 30 days. During that 30-day period, they can tell us if they would like us to file a patent. They can also tell us if we may have inadvertently included any of their confidential information. But they may not edit that. They have no editorial rights. And that's common in sponsored research, but that protects them. And it also allows them to tell us if an outcome is interesting to them. It's still up to us to patent it because we own that which is invented by our own employees. And then also in the area of academic freedom, no one has to apply for the money and no one has to take the money. No one has to agree to let BP vet their proposals 30 days in advance unless they willfully apply. And then there are other safeguards that are, even though they're not in the agreement, they simply are inherent in the academic tradition. Being a person who is a professor, a PI, who is taking sponsored research from a company and then putting students on that project knows that it has to be academically appropriate work. It can't be truly commercial work that would not advance their students academically toward a dissertation. And it can't be so mundane and trivial that it wouldn't be publishable. So there are those thresholds, too, that are simply inherent in an academic environment that don't have to be contracted for because they're simply true in an academic situation. Does that answer? But and also I didn't show the slide, but the government isn't funding very much energy research, and so BP, even with $500 million, it's a large amount for a university. It's small, on their radar screen. At least they are willing to fund research to give to an institute that manages the funding through a grant-making agency, and just like the Intel Lablet, expects to have innovation come from the bottom up, because VP is not telling anyone what they should write in their proposals. They are, just like David Tennenhouse, hoping that by giving out the money, if they stand back, they could be impressed by smart people. And that's an enlightened attitude.
My question is to maybe clarify a little bit on issues of intellectual property law. I imagine that you have to deal with that, and it's a very innovative. It's an innovating area. Typically, property was thought of in a very different way from which property is, in which you probably have to deal with. It's sometimes only at the conceptual level, and
oh yes.
So in that, like, what is your general take on, in terms of how much you have to deal with existing legal kind of practices and legal understanding, and also how much do you find that you have to somewhat lead a certain amount of the thought process, or maybe stake out some new way of thinking in the hope that eventually the legal process catches up with you?
Well, I guess the best answer to that would be that we have an orientation that we should only patent something if it would be an inducement to a company to invest in the further development of it, not for any other reason, including vanity patents or to get something on your resume or to grow your patent pile higher. And so if that's the criterion, then we shouldn't patent anything that we don't have an expression of interest in from a company, or that has been sponsored by a company that expects to have rights to it. So that significantly narrows what we think we should patent. And then even then, we don't speculatively patent something, because as I mentioned before, the patenting as opposed to publication and letting it flow out, having students who are trained for the new economy, the knowledge economy, should be a very small percentage of all of that which we produce at the university. It should be a fraction of 1% that we make proprietary, because under good stewardship principles, if we bother to make proprietary a result that was made at Berkeley, usually under federal funding, we have to make sure that we don't impede progress, or we don't, through exclusive licensing, stifle innovation or stifle collaboration. So it would be the exception rather than the norm. And in terms of leading, we don't force anyone to patent. We don't do this for any other reasons than to induce some positive investment. And if a company simply wants us to patent for a purpose that is not also similarly aligned with our mission, for instance, just to assert that patent against other companies without trying to make a product, we are very wary. We really don't want to patent something that ends up being nothing more than a legal assertion play by, for instance, a patent consolidator. That's why we have in our patent agreements a requirement to diligently commercialize those rights. If they're not diligent, we want the right to take it back, or to non-exclusively license, to reduce exclusivity to non-exclusivity and relicense it.
So I work for EBI in the intellectual property law group. So I'm going to answer just some of the questions, if I may, Dr. Mimura. So there are certain components of the question that I've heard raised. One of them is, how is the law going to play catch-up? That's one of the papers I'm writing, or supposed to be writing, just taking lessons from biomedicine, in biotechnology and synthetic biology to see what from that can be transposed onto biofuels, because the social aspect of biofuels is much more profound than the social aspect of medicine, at least in the way we view the energy crisis. Another question that was raised in front was about the writing of proposals. I did participate in the writing of the proposal for my group. So BP had absolutely no say in what we are supposed to do. They're just very interested in the outcomes. In terms of the 30-day requirement, though, we have seminars at EBI every Tuesday where scientists present their findings. And the last time we had it, there was a bit of a pushback from a couple of professors who thought that, who like to put together presentations like 2 hours before,
Exactly.
and they cannot work with a 30-day rule. Mm-hmm. So that is under some kind of revision. I don't know whether that kind of revision has to be incorporated into the agreement, but because those are two very major professors, we may need to toe their line, but that is something we're looking into. I'm working with Mitch Alschuler on IP strategies on that. And then the last comment is that we do have some not really problems, but there are some Berkeley professors who are sort of pulling back from EBI because of the requirement that they include their own intellectual property, which is not so good for EBI, because one of the reasons BP came in was because of the big shot names we have on this campus. So once again, we are working on IP strategies that try to delineate the existing intellectual property from these professors from the one that may be generated by EBI.
Thank you. That is an important point, and that was a very highly negotiated, contentious point throughout that literally took 3 months. And the concept here was that if a company fully pays for a project and there is IP from that, we call that foreground IP, and they take a license to it. If they cannot commercialize that product because there is background intellectual property that they must also have rights to in order to practice the foreground, then BP, unlike all the other companies, said, well, we really cannot simply leave it at that we would be blocked, even though we fully paid for it. So for the first time, UC, Berkeley, received an exception to policy, and we went into great detail about how we would address the question, going back to our goals, because we want the innovation to be deployed. We want to help BP with this problem. So we said in the agreement, if the background intellectual property is invented by researchers who are receiving funding under this agreement, then, and BP chooses a non-exclusive royalty-free license to the foreground, the BIP can be obtained under a NERF as well, non-exclusive royalty-free license. If someone is an inventor on the background intellectual property who hasn't derived a benefit from BP through funding, then BP would pay $20,000 per patent or $50,000 for a bundle. And that is much more in terms of contract language than other companies have had. But going back to the philosophy, we really wanted innovative, groundbreaking technologies to be deployed, and we thought we should at least say something as opposed to be silent. And this is a partnership. We don't want our IP to remain fallow. And it has affected other agreements in other industries. This is such a high-profile agreement. It has solved a perennial problem for many companies, including in the chemical industry and the automotive industry. You see, a policy group in the past had told us we would simply remain silent. But the magnitude of this deal required us to say something, and that was the situation. That was how that negotiation came out. We also negotiated for quite a long time to have an exception from the Department of Energy under the U.S. Bayh-Dole Act, under which universities can take title to inventions that they make using federal funding. If we had granted an exclusive license to BP under these awards, they would have been required to substantially manufacture products to be sold in the U.S. in the U.S. And that doesn't work for them, because if they're going to make ethanol from sugarcane in Brazil, they don't want to bring the raw material to the U.S. to make the ethanol. That would be a net negative energy consequence. So we advocated very hard for that and finally did receive that waiver. Part of the compelling argument for that was that BP brings a demonstrable benefit to the U.S. through corporate income tax, payroll tax, all of the sponsored research, in many ways more than U.S. companies that are operating solely in the U.S. And so finally that argument carried the day. And thank goodness, because I think they wouldn't have gone for that.
And one last point on intellectual property. BP is giving us an unprecedented opportunity to iron out differences between different international treaties, like the Convention on Biological Diversity, WTO TRIPS, plant variety protection, and any other foreseeable kink we see in dissemination of the technology worldwide. And that's a really fun part of the project. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I should have mentioned it because it's a huge point. It's not just funding for research. It has also established 10 new faculty positions. That is so much more than we would receive in the typical corporate sponsored research agreement. And they would have the usual startup packages, $1 million in startup funds and $500,000 in renovation funds. Hugely valuable to us. And also we're building a building with the overhead from this agreement.
I have two questions. One is, during these last years, I've been signing some contracts with firms, and we use also the long-term relationship approach. And we found that it's very nice because you save a lot of transaction cost, and I think that is the best thing. But don't you think there is a risk, which is some kind of path dependence on the agreement are you closing? For instance, you talk about BP. Maybe Shell has a technology which is better. Maybe in 10 years, they will have a better technology, and Berkeley is not accessing that technology. Because we had that problem in Spain. We signed with Orange, and there was another firm, Telefónica. We wanted to go to sign with them because in some mobile technology has some good stuff, and they said, no, you have this long-term relationship with Orange, so we don't want to sign with you.
Right. Well, we don't have it to the exclusion of other relationships, and we had previous agreements with Chevron, other oil companies, and we continue to have other agreements with Chevron. When we signed this deal, it was such a high-profile deal that we thought our second application to the DOE for $125 million in energy research might be jeopardized, because we thought the agency might say, oh, Berkeley has that money, they have enough, and so we should smooth the curve and distribute this money elsewhere. But no, they said, if that's the hub of energy research, we want to have our money in there too. That's the place that energy research is happening. So it actually induced additional funding. And
yeah, but don't you think, for instance, Google is not going to sign with you and will prefer to sign with Stanford because you have some agreement with Yahoo?
We do have agreements with Yahoo and Google, but it's and we can't play favorites. We really can't say that we endorse one company or another or prefer one company or another. I think another data point is, how much capacity do we have? Can all the energy research labs at Berkeley have 3 or 4 contracts with energy companies and then stay sane? Right now we have, it is high profile, and we are charging the principal investigators with keeping their pots of money distinct. Federal money from corporate money, and within the corporate pool, the individual company work plan separate. It's not trivial, but we are placing it at that level of responsibility.
It seems to me that maybe your agreements with companies are maybe some kind of ad hoc agreements. Do you have any innovation plan for the whole university or for at least the schools in order to create synergies between the projects and the programs? And
we do have master agreements. Was that what you said? They are written de novo, ad hoc?
Yeah, and not master agreements, but if there is I don't know, maybe a 10 years innovation plan for the whole University of Berkeley.
Oh, I see. So far, we haven't had the luxury. I mean, with 400 research agreements of that type per year, we have transactions every day. we would like to get to the point where we have the luxury of marketing this or that. This is everything we have in nanotechnology, or on a grander scale to do more comprehensive business development. But we find we're bogged down in daily transactions. I don't know if we will ever grow to that extent, but that should be the wave of the future. That would be efficacious. Right now we are more reactive, doing a deal because we have a company ready to fund. But that would be thoughtful and strategic. Yes?
I've got a question concerning your office and your whole work, because it seems to be a very unique approach that you presented, and it seems to be like a lot of negotiation, bringing different parties together. So I would like to know how many people are working in this office. I would
17.
also like to know how did that project actually sort of evolve? I mean, when did it start, and how did these different or very unique goals like corporate, social, or you mentioned that there's social research. How did that evolve? And were there sort of critical incidents where you thought we go in this direction instead of that direction? Were there sort of self-reinforcing mechanisms that sort of supported your path? That's very interesting. And I had an additional question. You can, of course, build on the resources of UC Berkeley. Chemistry, everything basically. Would you pursue a similar path or strategy when you would do the same job for a very much smaller university that would perhaps only consist of economics, management, law, and cultural science without any sort of natural sciences? What would you change, or would you try to do the same thing?
Well, thank you for those. Those are good questions. In response to the first one, we deliberately restructured the office in 2004 at the request of the faculty, because the incoming research agreements and incoming material transfer and visitor agreements had formerly been tasked in the sponsored research agreements office, the sponsored projects office, the office that is responsible for other incoming agreements, but from federal and state agencies. But the people, since it was most of their business, the people doing that type of agreement wasn't quite the right type of person that we need to do this type of agreement. We were asked by the faculty to do them, but then we had no authority to sign them, because the faculty were coming to us and companies were coming to us because they knew that we did deals every day with companies. It's just that we were doing out licensing. But I refused the request to bring the whole activity into the licensing office, the OTL, which is doing the outgoing, because I knew that if we had the same staff doing both types, everyone would be doing research agreements, because research agreements are more important for the university, and they're timely. They must be done on an emergency basis. If a professor needs a plasmid, that's more important, or a transgenic mouse, than licensing out this code to Google. So, and then, inevitably, the university would complain that we weren't getting the licensing done. So I insisted I would take that activity on, but we had to separately resource it. And that's why that second office was established with its own infrastructure and its own staff. And on that staff has new job descriptions. We didn't simply take the staff out of the other office and move them in. I required a combination of 2 of the 3, science, law, or business background, to do that job, including IP management. And so everyone has at least 2 of the 3, and they're conversant in all of the areas that we do business in, and many came from startups or science or law background, business development, some are entrepreneurs. We have 17 total, 5 in the research agreement office, 13 in the licensing office, but the licensing office supports every day the research agreements, because it's more important to get the funding for the professors. And on the other one, if you don't do this in the social sciences, or let's say this was a university that isn't a research university, I can see a role for a business development approach to be established. For instance, here at the Twain Project, it's a crime that right now we don't have higher tech solutions to archiving and then accessing the information that is such a national gem. There could be, proactively, there could be something set up that a company might be delighted to sponsor, but we don't do it because we don't have time to move. Right now we're just doing the deals that come to us. We would hope to get to that phase where we can do the outreach and the strategic business development on a larger scale. And it also would do a lot in terms of mitigating the tensions that exist now between the haves and have-nots. Because we do often hear that the hard sciences get all the attention and all the big deals, and it's not as though the funding sources are the same. We're not going to get grants from the MacArthur Foundation to do energy research. But there is that feeling that, the hard sciences get the attention and the glory, and we should do more to induce some investment into the humanities. It's a huge part of the university. It's just that we traditionally haven't contracted in that sphere. Although we have some in some of the cross-disciplinary areas.
My question goes back to one of the slides you presented in your presentation. You spoke about having a difficulty measuring baselines, and I believe that had to do with metrics,
yeah.
and so
Right.
in sort of financial but social.
Uh-huh.
Well, how do you? I thought maybe that if you spent some more time on that, you'd probably be able to give a sense of how that could develop. And then the other question, I was just going to add a second question to that. Comparatively speaking, do you feel that given the size of the amount of agreements and the research work you have, that the concept of research parks, like some universities, like I visited University of Iowa, and they've almost created a separate section all the way down from the university with the park to accommodate the size of, and to make it faster, to build infrastructure to meet the demand of, for the intellectual and research kind of work involved. How do you see a balance here at the university between what you need to do and how much you have?
Yeah, the second one is probably easier. I'll take that one first. We haven't so far had to have an incubator or a business park right here, in part because the whole Bay Area has served as an incubator. A survey that we conducted in 2001 showed that between 70 and 80% of the professors in the hard sciences are consulting for at least one company. And that experience on those scientific advisory boards is extremely valuable to them in terms of, A, understanding how long and arduous the process of taking basic science to a real product is, and also it helps them to understand when they have an invention, and it gives them some business savvy. So they, through these networks that I keep referring to, second and third generation entrepreneurs are mentored by first generation entrepreneurs. We have so much infrastructure here that we haven't had to dedicate a particular place or park or resource that ourselves. There is a Campus Bay business park that has offered free rent to some of our startups. UC Berkeley actually, the Office of Technology licensing component of my unit, spins off between 10 and 12 companies per year, new companies, startup companies that are primarily faculty and student entrepreneur based. And they would love help in any of the vital things that they need when they're young: funding, space, legal help, business help. And so far, most of the help, at least in the very earliest stages, has come from angel investors, because it's too early for them to get venture capital. They really need so much more in order to get that thick plan that would result in venture capital, especially in this environment. And those angels also provide mentoring and business help. And then there are law firms that provide services, not all for free, but that help. So because we're fortunate to be in a very innovative, in an innovation ecosystem here, we haven't had so much pressure to resource that ourselves. Of course it would help. And a developer did, in fact, develop a large facility that used to be a car dealership in Berkeley. And we were very excited about putting startups into that space right at the corner of Fulton and Durant. But the city of Berkeley, after it was completed, and it was beautiful space, all to the historical society specs and everything, pulled the permit on it, the zoning permit. So the developer sold it to the Buddhist Temples of America instead at a profit. At least he made a profit. But there is a particular climate in Berkeley that isn't as welcoming as I would like it to be for these nascent startups that are very little more than just a couple of entrepreneurs with a great vision and a little bit of money. They could be more facilitative. So what happens, they go to Emeryville, Richmond, South San Francisco, pretty much right outside of our immediate sphere. Emeryville, Emory Bay. On the first one, on the metrics, the science of commensuration is completely undeveloped. I feel like our practice is preceding our transactional practices are preceding the science of how you really gauge your impact and how you show what you do has a ripple effect, statewide, nationally, or globally. And that's because the traditional surveys that we respond to in our profession, such as the Association of University Technology Managers, didn't ask the question. They always asked us to report numbers of patents in the US and overseas, the number of licenses, the amount of revenue, in a way that was actually stifling to the profession, because it sent the message that if those were the data they were collecting, that those were the data we should perform to, or the standards that we should perform to. And so I don't know, it's virgin territory. I think what we need are social scientists and economists to help us. If we really are going to be asked to quantify column B and show it against column A to demonstrate our efficacy, then we can't do that in our office. And we don't have a single even economist. We have those line maps, and we have data on startups, and we have the equity cash outs over the years, but we don't have and what it meant to you. I mean, did licensing the 7 energy companies that we have now in the last few years form a cluster that caused Northern California to be the hub of energy research? You know, that type of thing we're not capable ourselves of doing, but certainly there are really smart graduate students out there that might want to help us, including right here at Berkeley. And then, as I said, it's hard to parlay, even when you have that, into real funding for your office, because we want creative, flexible negotiators and contract drafters that don't have pre-existing prejudices or biases about what kind of deal should come out at the end of the day when they're contacting a company. If the right thing to do is to give it away or not patent it because it will help the diagnostics industry in sub-Saharan Africa, then that's the right thing to do. But we need people, the right-minded, like-minded people who are creative and willing to entertain those options. And to do that, we have to recruit and retain that caliber of person. So I don't know. Do you have suggestions on how one would go about measuring your true impact other than through the easily collectible data? We did a survey once, and UC did a survey, and they showed that between 13 and 14% of the CEOs of California biotech companies got their Ph.D. from Berkeley. So they're in positions of authority. That type of thing, you know, alumni data, help, but it's a non-trivial task.
So I think we can agree that there's a lot of research opportunity here, not only in biofuels, but in the social and economic aspects of how to not only structure these things, but then how to evaluate what they're doing, whether there are crowding out effects so that some firms are pushed away. That's a researchable question. Or alternatively, are there complementarities? Are there attractions that lead to virtuous circles and maybe some version of network effects that actually cause, rather than substitution and crowding out, attraction and building? I think that's something that has to be resolved empirically with actual data. And I think in Carol you see somebody who's got a lot of data and is eager to help. Maybe even in the next round of EBI proposals. They have already funded a number of social economic proposals in the first round of the 47. There'll be another round, I think, a year from now or so?
Sooner than that, and some are in the area of patent impaction points. You know, are there areas that we dare not go because even if you innovate, you'll be blocked?
So not only do we have research opportunities, there's even potential funding for those of us who are looking for these things. I wanted to make a couple of other comments in a more comparative aspect. We have folks here from Germany, from Spain, from Japan. I invite you to think about how your universities collaborate with industry around these issues of intellectual property. And I think both the formal legal aspects, which have been much of what we've discussed here, but also the informal aspects too, such as the ability or willingness of universities to allow faculty to engage in consulting or technical advisory work with companies, or are the professors treated as civil servants and this is actually viewed as being in contravention of their obligations as a civil servant. Hey, you've already got one job, we're already paying you a salary. You don't have the right to go do work for money in some other organization as well. You work here. And policies like that have a rationale to them, but they have some unintended consequences when we get to discussions like the one we're having today, where you really are trying to have impact on the work that university faculty do and have the impact the wider society. It isn't just the formal mechanisms that need to be addressed, but also the informal mechanisms that need attention as well. And I thought I would read to you something on the EBI that came out in today's Berkeleyan from the director of EBI, a man named Chris Somerville. And he says something I think is very exciting about this, this open approach to both collaborating with industry and trying to have real impact. So here's what he says. Something that we at EBI can uniquely do is to try to integrate all that information. We don't have an invented here syndrome. We're just as interested in what people are discovering elsewhere as what we're discovering here. We're building a group of colleagues across all the disciplines, one that should be connected through the normal academic networks to knowledge creation elsewhere in the world in all the fields. If we can integrate that knowledge, we think that will probably be our most unique contribution. That's really compatible with what a big university should do, in my opinion. Integrate and rationalize and make sense out of all this information. So I think that's an interesting perspective on this as well, which again speaks to the potential for attraction and then also integration, not only of the work being done with Berkeley and BP, but the work being done elsewhere in the world on biofuels, much of which is already proceeding, but at smaller scale, and there really aren't yet institutions that really gather these things together and help advance an agenda across a field. And this is, I think, maybe one of the most unique opportunities that a place like Berkeley, with the resources that have now been invested here, can really bring to the party.
There have been other precedents. For instance, the haplotype map of the human genome through Wellcome Trust funding was done through a massive distributed innovation network globally, where everyone immediately put their sequences into a common database. And it could not have been done in a single lab. And they did this in real time. So there could be, even if a university doesn't proactively put people together in an institute where they're working shoulder to shoulder with industry or in a cross-disciplinary way, there could be strategies without any management at all, other than an IT solution to collaboration. 10,000 heads are better than 1,000, and 4 heads are better than 1, and such.
I'm also circulating a list with asking for your names and emails, and we'll keep you posted on future activities. So if that list is circulating, please do put your name on it if you want to get information about upcoming activities. Any further questions for Carol?
Have you had any experience with having to deal with a case in the courts once you've gone through agreements and having to deal with disagreements? What your general feeling is? Do you feel it's a very difficult process to push a case through, or what has been your experience in that?
Are you referring to patent prosecution, the process by which we argue with the government?
Anything related to intellectual property?
Yeah, patent prosecution, the process by which you argue with the government to give you a patent because it's a monopoly, is long and arduous, and it can take 3 to 5 years. But it's according to certain ground rules. What we don't have a lot of experience with at Berkeley is enforcing our patent rights through patent infringement. We have taken, consistent with our philosophy, the approach that if our licensee sues a third party for infringing our patent that they are commercializing under a license from Berkeley, we could join in as the owner, but we don't unilaterally sue a company. Other universities have, and other universities within the UC system have. But if we were to weigh the relationship expense against that potential win, I can't see a situation where we would literally compete with the private sector in that way as a nonprofit university to instigate such an action. And that's, it's probably not system-wide, it's my personal opinion. And we have also had some interferences, for instance, in the nanotech field, which is so highly patented. We have interferences against other universities because people are mentored by others. That's just the academic tradition, and sometimes we're perceived to have patented around someone's mentor. And when that happens, of course, because we deal with other universities every day, we try everything to stay out of court. We always try mediation or just negotiation. It's our choice of last resort.
Carol, thank you very much for a fascinating talk.
Sorry, it was all over.